Let's now go back to the issue that has just come now with the decision taken by Ukraine to actually agree for talks in Belarus. Yes, Ukraine has agreed to hold peace talks with Russia in Belarus near Chernobyl exclusion zone. This after a phone call between President Volodymyr Zelensky and Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko. Ukrainian delegation, we are getting to know, has already left to Gomel for negotiations with the Russian side. Ukraine has also moved the International Court of Justice against the Russian military invasion. Joining us now on the program is Mr. Manjiv Singh Puri, former ambassador. Very good evening, Mr. Puri. Thank you so much for joining us here on Mirror Now. This is an interesting turn of events, would you say? On one hand, the military invasion is still on, even though Kharkiv, we get to know, has been retained. So it's a tough resistance put forth by the Ukrainian forces. On the other hand, now both sides have agreed to come together for talks. What do we make of this? What can come or emerge out of this?
Afrida, thank you very much. You know, after 3 or 4 days, at least we have some sign of the possibility of de-escalation. Although we shouldn't take this thing too far, because as you just yourself reported, there is resistance, but there is a lot of pressure on Kharkiv. And we don't know what else can happen. In fact, you know, my real simple worry is that a lot of resistance and egging on the Ukrainians for resistance rather than for talks with the Russians could result in a very grim situation. And I really don't even want to talk about it. But I'm glad that the Ukrainians came down from the idea that you must meet in a country like Poland, a NATO country, etc., and agreed to go to the Belarus border. It's a good sign. I hope they can make some kind of progress, although this is going to be a tough one, because the Russian demands will be pretty difficult and high to start with, insofar as Ukrainian leadership is concerned. And that itself is a big problem. I think another thing we need to note is the resolve of the people of Ukraine, which is really outstanding. People willing to send their families away and stay back and take up arms and say, we'll fight to the last man, last child, and just be there. It's certainly giving the Russians much to think about. But on the other hand, I remain always very fearsome of courage, no matter how well placed and how good the intent.
Mr. Puri, do you see this, as something that has happened because of the arm twisting and because of the sanctions imposed and the Western pressure on Russia? And now that this whole idea of bringing in and blocking SWIFT, which is a very crucial for international transaction, was also being talked about, is that what made Russia decide to sort of come for dialogue? Or you think that, this had to happen because beyond a point, after all, Russia's idea was just to flex its muscles. And beyond a point, it always knew that it had to, after all, resolve with talks.
You know, my understanding is that the Russians have prepared themselves for sanctions over a very long period of time. And the idea of SWIFT is not a new one. Even now, the restrictions on SWIFT are somewhat limited. And so, therefore, my own feeling is that one of the things we need to understand is that Russia and Ukraine are intertwined in a community manner, civilizationally in various ways. A destruction of Ukraine? No, I don't think so. Now, I can't answer for President Putin and the way he's thinking. For many people, his thoughts and desires go well beyond what security requirements are and have much to do with, legacy, personal position, etc. But I do think that around from various sources, including those which are possibly close to him, Lukashenko from Belarus included, maybe even some of the more powerful people in Russia, would have also put some kind of pressure that, look, let's go in for the talks. But do remember also, the Russians also offered the talks in Belarus to start with,
yes,
while it was President Zelensky who said, we will talk, but we will talk in Poland. So, in my opinion, whichever side said yes or whatever may be the reason, let there be some degree of talks because bloodshed should be avoided at all costs.
Yes, but will President Zelensky agree to Russia's terms? Do you see any change of heart that Russia would have? Because the Russian terms are very clear They've been at it for quite a long time now. So what changes and what do you think would be the future of President Zelensky?
Look, this is, of course, a million-dollar question, very difficult, because the Russian terms are not only going to be don't join NATO and remain a neutral country, kind of terms which, possibly can be agreed to. But the terms could be what President Putin did say in a public articulation a few days back, that, the government must be got rid of. He's called them neo-Nazis, and that the military, which he thinks are people which are more amenable to, let's say, good relations with Russia, should take over. Now, this is a very, very difficult call. After all, how do you expect President Zelensky to say that, I will leave, even though he may wish to? Remember also, there is a great deal of resolve being shown by the people of Ukraine. And so, with that happening, although, in the thousands people are leaving and crossing the border, many are staying back. The men are staying back. The women and children are being sent away. This resolve, and you've seen it in Kharkiv, also in a sense steals the back of someone like President Zelensky, who was democratically elected after all. So all in all, a very tough call. But I sincerely hope that at the end of the day, the demands are such that they can be met. And on the other hand, Kiev also doesn't stand on either being a hero or playing victim.
Right. But, just one last question, Ambassador Puri, that, now that this is happening 4 days into the military invasion, Russia has managed to show its firepower. Which side do you think would have greater bargaining power? Ukraine, at the end of the day, despite all the Western support that seemed to be there, end of the day, it had to fend for itself, isn't it?
Well, that's absolutely right. And I am afraid this is an abject lesson for all countries in the world. When you are willing to let yourself be the playground for bigger powers, then, whatever they do among themselves is a different matter. But you invariably come off the worse off. So my heart goes out to the Ukrainians and to the Ukrainian government and the people out there. Their bargaining powers are very limited. I mean, of course, they can continue to bargain on this victim business, the sanctions on Russia, and so on and so forth. The fact that the whole world is calling on the Russians, essentially, to de-escalate violence. But the fact of the matter is, the Russians also are steely-headed people. President Putin has done this despite the whole world being raged against him. And therefore, I would also say that while the Ukrainians do have some cards to play, and they could play them, they need to play the cards carefully. And I, at least personally, remain very convinced that I laud their courage. I laud their determination. I'm very much for them. All my sympathies are with them. But I certainly don't want all of that to result in what I would otherwise fear.
End of the day, it's the people who suffer. And we have been showing a lot of that the human suffering. Indians out there also in many ways stuck in this crossfire between two countries. Trying to get them out is something that the MEA is now engaged with in Operation Ganga. Thank you, Ambassador Puri, for joining us on The Urban Debate.